All right, so we are on now. Thank you for joining me, Irma, and anybody else who comes in later. Once again, I just want to thank you for being a part of this, and if you're listening later, to take the opportunity to learn more about this topic. It's something that's very near and dear to me, which is working with youth on the climate crisis. Just to let you know a little bit about why I know so much about this topic is because I'm the hub coordinator, which means that I help facilitate and coordinate discussions for young activists around the climate crisis through the Sunrise Movement, and specifically in the MetroWest region of the Sunrise Movement. So that's a bunch of towns within the area west of Boston. So to start, and Irma, you feel free to join me in here, I'm going to first start with a video because I always like to do that, and let me know if you can't hear it.
Okay.
All right, so, and it's just a little short video. Okay.
But there are some things that everyone can get started with. Bad news first, if you thought I would tell you now to cycle more or eat less meat, to fly less or to go secondhand shopping, sorry. This is not that easy, but here comes the good news. You are more than consumers and shoppers, even though the industry would like you to keep yourselves limited to that. No, me and you, we are all political beings, and we can all be part of this answer. We can all be something that many people call climate activists. Yay?
So yeah, so that leads me to the next thing, which is when I start most of my meetings with the young people that I work with, I usually start with a word of the day to get us talking about how we're feeling. So Irma, since you're on, I'd like to ask you what in the topic of climate change, or in the topic of the climate crisis, or even with the idea of the coronavirus and how kind of you're feeling, what makes you feel activated in this moment?
I think like with the whole situation that's happening right now, it's kind of like the political component. So I guess politics makes me feel activated because I know that there's a lot of concern and like a lot of conversation going around how we move about the climate crisis, as well as like this health emergency too.
Right, and I'm with you as well. I think the urgency mixed with the political will that makes things happen is what activates me too. And I think it's important when we work with young people, especially on the issues of climate change, is that we always check in on ourselves first. So that's kind of one of the first lessons I like to give everybody is make sure you're just doing a temperature check on your people's feelings, because as you can see from this slide, I'll move my stuff so you can see everything, that we have large-scale international organizations like the IPCC, which is the International Panel on Climate Change, which is a UN organization, which composes many, many countries. We have daily problems with, visuals of polar bears drowning and icebergs melting, and we're constantly hearing that we have to do something about this right now, and action has to be done, and there's many steps that we have to do to make it happen, and we're just not doing it. So
Right.
Knowing that this kind of feels like a big burden and the climate crisis seems like such a massive issue, is how we feel, just like how I started the conversation, does that matter when it comes to a massive issue like the climate crisis? What do you think, Irma?
I think it definitely does. People are very entitled to their opinions, their thoughts and everything. And really like passion is a feeling, and sometimes that's what drives change.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. And I wanted to prompt that even further by showing why climate change, why feelings matter with the climate crisis. The first thing that I've noticed when working with young people is that when we talk about our feelings, it gives stakes to the issue. I feel this way, and there's kind of damage that's being done when I feel this way. There's an effect to me. And so there are stakes that happen when we talk about our feelings this way. The second thing we'll learn about when we talk about climate activism is that community is really important. So there's a community that comes from having shared burden of these feelings. So you and I are both feeling activated, but there's sometimes we might both feel scared about this issue, or feel hopeless, or feel like we can't address this problem head on. But it's through sharing that empathy with each other that we gain strength. And then the third thing is that we ultimately want to take this collective action, talking about our feelings, and we want to move ourselves from fear, which doesn't get us a lot of action, to resolve, which does lead us to action. So it means we still have those feelings, but there's activity that comes out of it afterwards, right?
Right.
Yeah. So thank you. I like a little bit of call and response to this. It'll really help going on here. So why Sunrise Movement? Why did I decide to join it? Just to give you a little idea of what Sunrise is, it all started with 10 people in Washington, D.C. and Boston. You will notice the woman on the right, on the back row, second from the right, that's Varshini Prakash. She still is the executive director of Sunrise Movement. And it was just a mix of people who decided that there is a unique opportunity for young people to get involved in the climate crisis, that we need a political action to make things happen. So it started with this small room and this small birthday cake, which looked like it was taking place in the 70s, but really was only 3 or 4 years ago. And now we're about 100,000 people strong. So you can realize that it started with something really small and now they're really grown.
Wow.
Also, Sunrise has a plan, and they've started with making sure that at each month they have some sort of action that gets people going. This was the plan from 2019. This is going to change, of course, with the new coronavirus reality. But it's just important to note that throughout the time, we're constantly checking in with each other. We're constantly coordinating as a national effort, which then gets decentralized to our hubs. The big policy position that we all want to do at this point is called the Green New Deal. Now, Emer, have you heard of the Green New Deal before?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Do you have like a good idea of what it's all about without reading?
No.
Okay.
That's something I'd be interested to know more about.
Cool. So, the Green New Deal, we won't be able to go into too much detail about how it got started and what its roots are, but ideally it's kind of 3 main points. The first one is that the Green New Deal is a legislative action that's supposed to be that we want to put through Congress, in which 100% renewable energy will be in the United States by 2030. Knowing full well that we have to switch our energy to renewable sources like wind and solar, it's kind of puts it at the front force of how we're going to tackle the action. But, and as point 2 mentions, it guarantees that millions of jobs are done in the process. So what we're trying to do is build a new economy out of this issue. So what that means is that when we transfer over to this new energy system, it benefits people by creating jobs and where people are actively participating in building towards this idea. And the third idea, and why it's very different from the New Deal, which happened in the 1930s and 40s, is that it's supposed to mitigate the racial, regional, and gender-based inequalities and then protect and invest the frontline communities. It recognizes that the last time the New Deal happened, people were left behind in the process. A lot of people didn't get access to the resources and jobs that came out of it. And so it recognizes that climate change is going to hit people unequally, especially those living near coastlines and places with poor infrastructure and resources. So we want to make sure that we invest in these communities so that they go forward. And that's just, and there's a lot more to it, but that's it. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Cool. As I said, it makes it better than me talking to myself. So
that's so important. I really, because I know Alejandra Ocasio, I told you that I met her. Yeah. I know she's like such a big proponent for this, so it's like interesting to see how even the wealth gap is included in race inequality and income and all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, and that's a great thing that you met at AOC in this context. She's one of the founders of the movement, along with our Senator Ed Markey. So it's just really good to know that like we have such a local presence that's making this happen.
Right.
And so when I say hubs, what I mean is that Sunrise runs under a decentralized organization structure. And what that means is that there's a national priority that we all kind of coordinate together, but we really operate as individual entities. So if you look at the map on the left here, what you'll notice is that the spots all over the map are all individual hubs that have taken on the national entity to make it relevant for their local communities. And on the right, you will see where my hub is located in the MetroWest region of Massachusetts, but you'll also see that we have a Boston hub, we have a Worcester hub, we have a Springfield hub, we have all the places around North Shore, we have several in Cod, and that's just ever expanding since this map was taken. So yeah, because we want to make sure it's relevant for everybody in the place that they're at.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what does my hub do specifically? And I think this is really important to note is Sunrise's main goal is to make climate change an urgent priority across America by sharing our stories. So we want to make it a priority. We don't want it to be put in the back burner. We want to make it an important issue. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to end the corrupting influence of fossil fuel CEOs on our politics. when we talk about, sharing our story and why that's an important tool for us, we have a very big us who's involved in the movement and a very small them, which is fossil fuel CEOs and executives and the people that they pay, right? Because we want to make sure we have as many people in the movement. And then lastly, we want to move the political will and elect leaders who stand for the health and well-being of all people. So we'll go more into that a little later, but in our hub, we want to make sure that we make it relevant to the people in MetroWest Massachusetts. And then we train and elevate local young people within our region to be current and future climate leaders. It's not enough for me to be here speaking about this issue. It's just enough that we're passing on capacities within our different people that we work, especially young people. And the first, and I know this sounds weird for a lot of people because, you've seen a lot of climate strikes and you've seen a lot of action. We think that's a second step in this process. The first is that we want to create community. Who is it that takes this thing seriously? Who wants to be involved? How are we going to support ourselves as a community? And that's going to inform and strengthen what we do as action. Right? And then we always want to make sure that we prioritize social and restorative justice into our work. So we believe that climate justice work is anti-oppression work. So just as much as it is important to put solar panels out, we want to make sure that we recognize racial injustices and social injustices that exist. And finally, we want to be allies. We don't want to recreate the wheel all the time, and we want to just support everybody who's doing something to support it. So this is all making sense. I know this is a lot of organizational lingo, but
yeah, it does.
Cool. Excellent. So I also want to put this out there to everybody who's listening, including you, Irma, that I am not an expert in the climate. While I know a lot and I studied a lot and I do this job on my own, I don't have the authority to talk about climate and the climate movement as a whole, but I can speak to the lessons I've learned doing this work. So the first thing that I've learned, one of the lessons that I've learned through it, so I'm going to break it down into 4 individual lessons. The first one is that young people are shouldering the need to solve a lot of social issues concurrently with climate crisis. So what do you think that means to you, Irma?
Well, I think you kind of addressed it earlier. Like, I know one of the things that's happening, at least with education right now, is they're trying to solve issues within education, but also raise awareness about the climate crisis. So I guess like knowing that they go hand in hand and trying to, raise awareness about it.
Right. So the way I like to explain it to people is it's like young people today have a backpack. And this backpack has a lot of things that we're filling into it, a lot of social things that haven't been addressed yet that we are dealing with at the same time. So from right to left, we got 11 years to change the climate crisis, but that is coupled with an increased cost of living, systemic racism, 1 or possibly 2 recessions, systemic gender related issues, wage stagnation, increased healthcare costs, $1.5 trillion of student debt, and then having to care for increasingly aging parents. Now, as a presumably young person yourself, Irma, does stuff like this feel like it weighs on you like it does for a lot of people I work with?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, like right now, I'm still a college student, so like, yes, it does worry me, but it doesn't hit me as like strong as people who are straight out of college or people who are older than me.
Right. And it's just something that got kicked down the road just long enough that we weren't able to, really address it head on and make it. So just knowing that we recognize that burden is really important to what we do as climate activists.
Yeah.
And so what I've listed is that it comes down to basically generational disregard. So this is not exclusive to millennials and Gen Z activists, but it's something that I see. All of these quotes are things that I've seen directed at me or my activists that have people, that people have said to us in regards to what we want to have happen. All right. So the first one is the disregard of change. And so this is the general attitude of, I was able to get by in my time, so you have to find a way to manage. Right? Then there's disregard of struggle, which means that you're disregarding the fact that there's pain associated with these issues, which a lot of times you'll hear, suck it up, snowflake, or you're too sensitive, right? That disregards that there's any problem at all. Then there's the disregard of want, meaning it invalidates someone wanting to have something happen. They'll say what you want is too naive. You haven't really thought of what you want. You millennials or Gen Zers want everything to you, handed to you. So that's a disregard of want. Last is the disregard of trust. You are too young to be part of the solution. I don't trust you in terms of your ability to be a leader in this situation. So we're going to do a little bit of an exercise between you, me, you and I, Irma.
Mm-hmm.
You can read the screen, right?
Yes.
All right, cool. So instead of what is being said here, the disregard of change and all that stuff, let's think of how we can alternatively think about what to think in this situation. So instead of saying like, oh, it was okay in my time, you'll manage. You might be able to say, well, currently the situation, the social situation, economic situation is different for people of this generation and younger. And so there has to be a recognition that there has been a change, right? So that's how the activity is going to go.
Yeah.
So disregard of struggle. Instead of saying, suck it up, you're too sensitive, you don't get it, what would you say instead?
Like, it has to be positive, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, so I would say, like, your feelings are valid. Can you tell me a little bit more about, like, where you're coming from?
That's great. That's perfect. Yeah, so having an empathetic ear.
Yeah.
And there's that's perfect. Disregard of want. You know, what you want is too naive. You don't know yet what you want. You don't really, you haven't really thought this out. What would you say instead of that?
Well, I think that like, it's important to be like, oh, okay, like, I guess let me hear more about what you have to say, and like and then, like, I guess initiate a conversation about, like, I guess just giving your thoughts and then receiving feedback for it.
Right. Yeah, it's exactly it. And then last is the disregard of trust, which is saying, I don't trust you yet to lead because you're a teenager or an elementary school student or a college student. What would you say to that?
I think, honestly, since I'm a little younger and I have been, like, in a position where they turn me down because of my age, I think it's important just to recognize that, like, sometimes people who are younger or just people with, like, more innovative minds, might have great ideas too, or they will. Right. So just hearing them out, having open ears.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you're bringing in that perspective as well. Right. It's to say that we're all in this together, and that in some way, shape, or form, you want to give someone an opportunity to share their ideas, because they could be good ones, including those that are older as well. Yeah.
And I think that there is no wrong answer or no bad idea, because honestly, like, we've gotten this far, you know?
Right.
With so many ideas.
Right. I completely agree. So that just fills out the first lesson. It's just recognizing that it's real and that there's real struggle that's exclusive to younger generations at this point. So the second lesson I've learned is that young people tend to value community when seeking solutions. Now, I don't know about you, but what I've learned from doing this when I work with young people is that young people tend to value social change as a climate solution. So instead of saying we need more solar panels or we need to recycle more, they say we have to change systemic issues first. Another thing that they value is collaboration and sharing. They don't want to be an individual doing their ideas. We want to make sure everybody is collaborating in the process to make sure that there's enough information being shared. Also, learning is collaborative. We want to make sure that everybody's learning together and not just individual competition between who's going to get there first.
Right.
And finally, they value elevating voices and representation in movements. Do you feel like in your opportunity, as someone who represents your own demographic, do you feel this is something that's relevant to you as well?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think all of those points are really good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's something to note when you work with someone who may be older. They have worked within a very specific system of science and technology for their solutions. But now we're finding that young people are transferring over those ideas. Hey, Susie, are transferring those ideas over to elevating those voices. So, and so that's just another one of the lessons I learned. So I was going to have us do another activity, but since it's just Irma and Susie here. Hi, Susie. You know what? I'm going to share it anyway. So
I'm happy to participate.
Yes, great. Excellent. So what we were just talking about, Susie, was that we were talking about the different ways in which young people interact with learning about climate change, how they work within the space, and how Sunrise is kind of unique in that way of making it so that, so that young people get active in this. So I'm just going to open up a document. And then we're going to Hold on. 1 second. And then I'm gonna open it up. Okay, and then right. Just taking a second. All right. All right. So I'm in the chat. I'm going to put in an activity that we kind of, and Irma, you've done this before with Fun Retro, in that I'd like you to fill out, everybody. All right. So take this opportunity to open up the link in the notes, and I'm going to stop recording here. I'm going to pause the recording. Excellent. All right. So as you can see, Susan, I'll give you a little bit more time to read it, because as I said, I'm not an expert in climate change, but I am able to, I learned some lessons through climate activism, and those shared ideas are something that's really important to us as a group. So I'll just let you read those now. I don't know why it's not letting me do the camera now, but so young people are showing the need for solve a lot of social issues concurrently with the climate crisis. Young people tend to value community when seeking solution. And finally, what I'm going to make clear with this following activity is, if we're going to be training activists, it's not just that we have to teach them skills, but it also requires us to change our mindset about the climate crisis. And I'll explain a little bit more what that means. So what that means is, when we talk about climate crisis and we talk about environmentalism in general, a lot of it baked into the current state of it is biases. So what you might find if you were to talk to, say, a climate scientist or to talk to a legislator, they'll say that climate crisis is strictly a scientific issue, and it's only meant for experts who come with data. But what we're finding as we do more activism work is that feelings matter in the climate crisis. And it matters that we care about this issue because it allows us to make the stakes real. Case in point. Can everybody see the screen, by the way? It looks like a chart. Just want to make sure everybody can see.
No, there's no share screen.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to get out of this, and I'm going to try it again to see if it shares. Oh, it's this one. Cool. All right.
Now we can see.
Great. Excellent. So what you'll see here is kind of a common anecdote of how we're going to solve climate change, or how we're going to contribute to climate change. And it ranges from our consumer actions, like upgrading our light bulbs, making sure that we recycle, and washing clothes differently, and eating a plant-based diet, buying different cars, to all the way at the end where it's saying have one fewer child. So it's saying regulating your reproductive output in order to fix climate change. When you look at this kind of idea, does this seem tenable to you as a person who's looking at this, either Irma or Susie?
Yeah, I think it's very, I don't know, it's nice to see that, like, there's ways where you can have an impact, whether it's low or high, like you can contribute in different ways.
Right. But also at the same time, it makes it so that individuals are the key component of the action, and it makes it very difficult to say, I can't buy a green energy car if there's a certain, if you have a certain ability to pay for a plant-based diet, maybe that's not affordable to you. So it also limits your ability to interact based on what you can do. So
All right.
so this is another thing that happens when we talk about environmental action. So let's all be environmentalists and put our environmental hat on us. If we were to think like environmentalists, putting on our thinking caps, which would you choose if you were to be a good environmentalist, the banana or the steak? Knowing what we read previously. And don't worry, I'm not here to give you a zinger. This is actually a pretty basic question.
The banana.
Yeah, you think so too, Susie?
Well, given that it said to switch to a plant-based diet, that would be my first guess.
Right, and the chart would suggest that, yes, that's you being a good environmentalist by choosing the banana. But the steps to get to your banana are a little different. A lot of times the forests are raised to get access to fertile land that creates those bananas. It's internationally grown and processed, which creates climate carbon input because you have to travel long distances by shipping it in refrigerated ships, which also creates more to the carbon issues. It also makes it so that it has to be cleaned and stocked and processed as well as transported in a truck, which eventually then leads to your choice of banana or steak. So what we're trying to figure out in this activism idea is to change our mindset to realize that there's a lot more that's decided for us well before we make the good environmental choice of steak versus banana. Right? So the bias is that we best affect our climate outcomes as consumers, but what we try to teach our young activists is that we affect climate outcomes by a combination of personal choices, but also pushing political action for systemic change. Does anybody have any thoughts about that thought?
It's exciting to see that balance of the personal choice and the political change. Did the movement have that from the beginning, both parts?
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. So this is a chart. I'm going to try to move things out of the way. But this is a chart of what it would mean to be an environmentalist versus being an activist. If you are being an environmentalist, what you're doing is you are talking forward. So you are telling people to do renewable energy. You want them to reduce their plastic consumption. You're recycling. You're individually telling people how to consume. Or you're backwards trying to change your own habits. So changing your consumer habits, changing your eating habits, changing your transportation, your reproductive choices. So you're either going forward or back trying to get those individual choices to be made. But there's also some terrible people out there that like to talk down, which means that they blame immigration, they blame people receiving social benefits, and they blame large poor family for taking up a lot of resources. So in some cases, you might even receive prejudice out of the idea of being environmentalist. What makes that different from being an activist is that we want to talk about power. We want to talk upwards. So ideally, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we are trying to make change upward to those that have the ability to make the change. That includes the oil companies, the oil executives, their lobbying firms, as well as the legislators that take money from them in that process. So environmentalist has these directionalities of forward and back and down. Power. What activist wants to do is talk upwards. Does that make sense? Yeah, cool. So once again, another bias is that climate crisis is strictly an issue of science and economics, but it resembles all facets of inequality, abuses of concentrated power, which need to be rectified by people power. What do you all think about that difference, that juxtaposition? Irma, do you have an idea?
Yeah, I think it's so in my class, the sociology of empowerment last semester, we talked a lot about this and how it really does affect a lot of the lower, especially the lower class, and like it deals a lot with like where, as a person who identifies as a first-gen low-income student, and like where we live in our area, like we live in a location where there's higher like pollution rates and like all these things. So I think that really the part where it says it resembles all facets of inequality, and like it also deals with like income and stuff like that and economics. It does resemble like my experience, because I never realized it until I went to college.
Yeah. Anything, Susie, do you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I mean, I just really appreciate challenging the notion that you can only talk about the climate crisis if you're a scientist.
Right.
I think there's more people that need to believe in the science, but I think to only say it's the science is totally missing the full breadth of what's intertwined with it. So I appreciate.
That's a great point, Susie. And it leads into really what we try to get people to learn is that words matter, and how it's interconnected with different social issues are things like saying climate justice versus environmental justice. I remember I was discussing this with you before, Susan, but Irma, I'm going to kind of give it some context. Climate justice is actually a very different concept than environmental justice. A lot of times they're used interchangeably, but environmental justice has its own roots in the racial justice movement. It is basically to say that all people should have equal protection under the law for environmental protection, and that there are specific communities institutionally that are harmed because of this inequitability of environmental impact. So, so people who are part of the racial justice movement, part of Black Lives Matter, want to make sure that we don't reduce the racial context of environmental justice from climate justice, which has kind of become this whole catch-all word for social justice and climate. And also that leads to environmental biases. This picture here is actually from Framingham, a Framingham town hall. And what is one thing you might notice about this conversation of climate that you're seeing in this picture? Anything, Irma or Susie?
I think I see a lot of older people,
Uh-huh.
and it's definitely like little kids and people of color involved.
Yes. So you're going to see that there's a disproportional accessibility of how the discussion of climate gets happen based on the perception of environmentalism as this kind of technological and policy-based idea. You'll see that a lot of times it's represented by a very specific demographic, which, whether intentional or not, only supports the people who are actively able to participate in it. So if you're able to go to these town halls, if you feel welcome to these town halls, if you're able to go to your legislator, if you feel like you're welcome to your legislator, you're able to have a higher elevated voice than someone who doesn't really have access to it in that regard. So there's biases that do get built in the process.
I will say though, I noticed what you're gonna notice, but I'm also impressed at how full the room is.
Yes, it is a very important thing in MetroWest region, that's for sure. And also it ties a lot with indigenous rights. A lot of the environmental impact that affects these things are for many communities of color, specifically those that are from indigenous communities and First Peoples. And they're one of the first people to sound the alarm when it comes to environmental degradation because of their cultural connection to the land.
Right.
And finally, for people who are interested in things like women and reproductive rights, a lot of times the environment is also tied to the population. So who here, say yay or nay if you're through the fall, is afraid of overpopulation as an environmental issue?
Yay.
Yay? Yeah. Well, the reason why a lot of us have that idea is from a guy named Robert Malthus, who created this idea called the population bomb, essentially, in which our population is going to well increase past our ability to represent our resources. And what that happens a lot of times is that it leads to specifically women taking on the burden of reducing population. And so the picture on the right is women receiving forced sterilization in India during the 80s, 70s, and 80s, specifically because they were worried about this population bomb. Women were by the government, and specifically in poorer, darker skinned communities, were forced to take on this forced sterilization process. So it's recognizing that with this fear that comes with the climate crisis, that there are people that do get negatively impacted by it. Have you heard about the story before?
Yeah.
Yeah, good, cool. So the one to understand the bias is that climate crisis is urgent and needs to be addressed immediately and should receive sole priority. But the reality is that in the process of fixing the climate crisis, we cannot further oppress marginalized groups and include their justice frameworks into ours. What is your general thoughts on that? Being blocked. Irma or Susie? And it's okay, we can move on if
I was just gonna let Irma go if she had a thought, but I appreciate the specific highlighting of not oppressing marginalized groups so that they fit our frameworks of justice. And it's interesting to see how often we seek to have developing countries meet our standards of, say, air pollution or other things when they're at a different phase in their industrial development. So I think, I appreciate that you're highlighting this because it is important to know that something can still be urgent without having to marginalize.
Irma, do you have similar thoughts or different thoughts?
Yeah, I was letting it settle in, reading through it again.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with what Susie is saying.
Yeah, and that a lot of times in the urgency of it, a lot of times we feel the need to move, but then in the process, people get left behind in it. And so that's what we try to avoid when we work in this issue. So the last lesson I've learned while working with young activists is that our most powerful tool that we use is our story. Knowing full well that young people don't own land, they are a lot of times unable to vote, a lot of times don't have lots of extra responsibilities during the day that are outside of their control, like going to school and working extra, that we want to make sure that we equip the things that give them the most power in the situations that they're working with. And in this case, we want to make sure that they work with their stories. So I'm going to open this up for discussion. What makes a good story? Just quick blush. What do you think makes a good story, Irma or Susie?
I think like once I don't know, I want to say like asking the right questions in order to get like kind of the emotion out of it.
Right.
Yeah, like experience is really important for stories too.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with the experience of having a personal tie when possible and balancing fact in quotes with feeling, as you said, bringing that feeling in there.
Well, you all did spectacular, because it leads into my next prompt, which is what Sunrise does is a very simple message, which is make it simple. So speak the language of the people. Don't speak a lot of jargon and making it, too scientific. We align ourselves with similar people's feelings and emotions. We appeal to their morality, and we just tell them that, like, it's possible, we can do this. And the second thing we do is we make it matter. Right? We want to tell a meaningful story so the public wants to engage with and support the movement today. We don't want them to support it later or maybe think about it. We want them to feel like they can be part of it when we tell our story. So why do we tell stories? We do it to build relationships, to give knowledge, to create connection, to build gaps, and broaden our us. Susie, I was talking to Irma that when the Sunrise Movement talks about who is involved in the climate crisis, we say broad us, small them. Us includes a large amount of people, and them is a very specific group, which is fossil fuel executives and CEOs and the legislators that support them. And the us is everybody. So if you are a fossil fuel worker, so you work on an oil rig, you are part of our broad us. If you are someone who is a Republican or pro-capitalist idea, you are actually part of our broad us. Our them is very small. We want to make the issue personal, make the issue simple, make it real, and of course, once again, make it matter. So now we're going to hear Adie's story. Adie Barkin, who is a healthcare activist. Specifically, this was last year when they were trying to push, when Republicans were pushing through a healthcare law that ultimately failed in Congress, and a lot of it was due to his efforts in the activism. So we're going to hear his story. And what I want you to do is just really listen to how you feel and what resonates with you in this moment. Okay. And by resonate, we want to make sure that you listen with your heart, share back the moments that you felt while he was speaking. And this is a good practice for generating the empathy that we try to do in the work that we do. All right. So let me know if you can't hear this, but can you hear it?
Hey Carl, it's me, Dad. By the time you're watching this, you will have grown up to be strong and courageous, just like you are now as a little boy. But I don't know how much longer I'll be around for you. I was diagnosed with ALS today, which is a deadly, debilitating disease. A year ago, I was a healthy man. Today, my muscles are turning into jello, and my voice ain't what it used to be. After I was diagnosed, the president and Congress passed a tax bill that put my health care at risk. The coming years are going to be really hard, Carl. For me, for you, for Mom. I'm going to need medicine. I'm going to need a ventilator. And I'm going to need Medicare to help pay for my health care. I've paid into Medicare and Medicaid all my working life. But this tax bill could rip all of that away.
The AARP has come out against the tax bill. They see it means $25 billion in cuts to Medicare next year alone.
All to give tax cuts to billionaires who don't need them. So I went to Washington, D.C. to tell our representatives that this bill was wrong, immoral, and un-American.
My next guest made headlines when he confronted a Republican senator on an airplane.
Think about my son and your grandchildren. You can be an American hero. Senator, I'm dying. Come on. Why are you running away from me? All right, I'm going to knock on your door. Ryan. Capitol Police, I wanted to do what I could to help create a better country for you to live in. Democracy is beautiful. Democracy is beautiful. I want to be a role model for you, even if I'm gone. I'm losing my ability to speak, so I'm asking people to be my voice. I'm losing my ability to walk, so I'm asking people to march for me. To vote to replace these Republicans in Congress with people who listen to families like ours. All that matters to me is to make you proud of your old dad, because I'm already so proud of you.
All right. So so the first question I'm going to ask is, was that a good story? Irma or Susie?
Wow. Yeah, I absolutely loved it.
Very powerful.
It was very powerful.
Yeah. So so we're going to practice a little bit of resonance. This is when we express an emotion that we felt in our bodies when we heard the story. So with 80's story, what were some things that resonated with you? What are some words that he said or some things that you saw that with his story that made you feel? Irma?
I think it made me feel just angry when they were arresting him, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it made me feel angry because it just goes to show how sometimes insensitive even our government can be when a person who is clearly not in the condition but is still fighting for something that he's passionate about and that he desperately needs, they're still willing to put that aside and just be you know what, we can't do anything about it, or we can't do much about it in the moment.
Right.
Yeah, for me.
Go ahead, Susie. Yeah, go ahead.
Two of the moments, I was almost tearing up throughout, but I think two of the moments where I felt most, and I appreciate your emphasis on that actual feeling part, are when he gets picked up and carried away, I think as you're saying, to be arrested, Irma, and that feeling that he is literally putting himself on the line. And so having a real appreciation for that. And then just also, when he had pictures with his son and spoke of not being there for his son as a new parent, that resonated with me a lot. And so I think he really did a powerful job in tapping into the personal and the bigger picture.
Yeah. So the next question I'm going to have is, do you know what his ask was? Did he make it clear what he was asking of people?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he even said it, I'm losing my voice. I'm asking you to, advocate. Yeah. I'm losing my ability to just even be able to function and be in places. So march for me.
Yeah. So it was a simple message. We can do this. And it made you feel like you were with 80 in that process. So I like sharing that story because I think it's a really good example of the kind of messaging that we like to do in this movement. So it's active listening. It's giving attention. It's saying, I felt right there with you when. I could feel in my body. You moved me when. These are ways in which we connect with people. And when we tell our stories to a similar way that 80 has about the climate crisis, we make it relevant for them. So what it is not is giving advice, one-upping, one-downing, which means that well, I am worse because I definitely couldn't walk before you. Or one-downing, which is saying, I wasn't having it as hard as you, but I have a really bad flu. So I find it very difficult as well as you. What you're doing is you're not making meaning, but telling you how you resonate and feelings with it. So I would normally have it us tell our story, but we're running out of time. So what I'm going to leave it with is talk about another way in which that young people share their story, is that they do it through song. And at the end of every sunrise meeting, what we do is we have a song that we sing that is representative of a social movement that existed out there. This is close to the spiritual movements that existed during the racial justice movements of their time. And it encourages people to sing along. And it's very funny in my experience to go to meetings and be like, okay, meeting's over, let's sing. And you'll find that people go from being very uncomfortable to then like being really involved and really excited for it. So we're gonna have a little bit of question and answer at the end, but I do like to close off with a song. So yeah. All right, so that is one of the things you'll see at all of our meetings is all of us singing together. What do you think about, how effective do you think it is that see activists working together in a song like this? Does it make you feel anything or resonates with you?
I think it's so beautiful. I think that like singing and storytelling and just like incorporating the arts is such a beautiful way to raise awareness and be involved, because it's something that brings people together and it allows them to celebrate in a time of, you know, uncertainty or desperation, or, you know, just trying to get the voice and the word out there. It's definitely a method that can be used to raise awareness about stuff like that.
Susie?
I also, you know, you talked about sunrise broadening to us, and I also appreciated that even within this song, when the camera panned around, you know, some people, like the person currently on the screen and a few others who were like singing and dancing and totally into it, but it seemed to be space also for some people that were maybe just crossing their arms and nodding their head.
Yep,
you know, they're participating in their own way and getting inspired by it, even if it wasn't their personality to dance and sing with the larger group. So I felt it was a broad us even within the singing.
That's great. So once again, that'll be the conclusion of our meeting. In summary, what I want you to take this at home, people who watch it, and Irma and Susie who's on the call, thank you for joining me and being interested in this topic. What we're learning is that there's a lot that goes into the climate crisis, into activating people around making the political will to make things change happen. But I promise you that what I've gained out of it more than anything is hope. When I work with young people, it makes me realize that it is possible, because I don't feel as alone in this process. In my own story, I feel like when I used to go outside as a kid, the nature was a thing that made me feel safe. It gave me respite. I would see the leaves blowing in the trees, and I would see the daffodils blowing away, and I'd be able to go down rolling hills, and it gave me a lot to think about, and it gave me peace. But as the warm weather got worse, and as winter got shorter, and we were getting hot days in March, and heavy hurricanes were coming through, the thing that once gave me peace now seems like a place that makes me feel more insecure. So I appreciate this movement, and I appreciate the young people supporting the things that make me feel less hopeless in this option. So I want to thank you for that time.
Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you.
All that you're doing for sharing.
Thank you. So any questions before we go? Because I know, just before that wasn't clear, that you wanted some more expansion on, because it's 8:05. Just want to respect time.
Bro, trust me. I am here. I have time.
Good. Do you have any questions there, Irma?
Yeah, I have one question.
Sure.
What is something that you recommend, at least like I know the situation kind of changed because, you know, we're all off campus now.
Mm-hmm.
But what is something that you encourage at least people like me in college to continue doing to raise awareness about getting involved either through your organization or just like raising awareness in general about the climate crisis?
That's a great question. What the good thing about Sunrise is that you're always getting information and you're always getting trainings available to you, because they recognize that like we all had this big plan of going through Earth Day and having large climate strikes and stuff like that, but that has since changed. So one thing that is available, especially to young people, what I say young people is qualified as anybody 35 or younger. So if you're within that range, you're welcome to join any Sunrise action. And even if you're older, as long as you allow young people to be front and center of the speaking engagements and let them lead, then you're totally welcome to go to those meetings. But one of the things that I would encourage you, and I can send you a link to, Irma, and anybody else who wants to do it, is they have what's called Sunrise School that they're doing virtually that is teaching you the same methods that I'm learning, you know, storytelling, resonance, how to activate what it means to talk to your state legislator, how to be, I'm trying to think of a word that's not bad, but how to make your message known to legislators, how to be more aggressive in your process. Because you might see some people walking up to a representative and be like, why aren't you doing this? Why don't you support this? Are you for the Green New Deal? And you can learn about that. That's called bird dogging. It's one of the many tools that we use. So I will send you a link and anybody else afterwards so that you can join the Sunrise School, and you can do it virtually now that a lot of you will be home. So, and that's something I'll definitely offer for people.
And if it's okay, I'll throw out a question too. Or did you have another question, Irma?
No, I already asked mine.
Yeah.
Well, I love what you said about Sunrise trying to have people feel like we can do this. You said this is really something we can tackle. And even in closing, you share that you really find a lot of hope from this. And as someone who is not as aware and involved on this topic as you are, or as I hope to be, it can often feel like, oh my God, we can't do this. Like, oh my God, this is terrifying. So what are one or two things other than seeing young people take action that really make you feel like as a global community, we can do this?
Right. I think it makes you realize that actually, when you think about climate change, for me, a lot of times it gets easy to get lost in the massiveness of it. You think about it in terms of glaciers melting. You think about it in terms of carbon input. So every time you see a car, it makes you nervous. Every time you see people flying too often, then you get nervous about it. But I think what Sunrise has helped me do that helps me realize that it is possible is we realize actually the solution and the problem itself is actually really small. And what I mean by that is that there's a concentration of power, specifically once again, our small them, the fossil fuel executives, CEOs, and lobbyists that are supporting power within government that is keeping people from learning about the situation, taking it seriously, that is making it so that you aren't taking the necessary steps. And it also makes it so that more money gets sent to oil and fossil fuel incentives than it does to people. So what makes me realize that it's actually doable is that the problem is actually really small. We have to address that. We have to address the power disparity that makes the climate crisis possible or makes it incapable for us to do it. And when I realize how many people get that and how many people want to see change in that regard, and it's also, this could be for gun rights. This could be for gender-based issues. This could be for, incarceration and all the things that other Segal Fellows are going to have passions about. The small them is what makes me realize that like we can address it by tackling and doing change on the small them. Any other questions you got, Irma?
No, I just thank you for the information.
No problem. And one thing that got presented to me, and I want to make sure I had space before I leave, Zainab wanted to ask how we did it. So what kind of work that we do. We do things such as climate strikes. We do bird dogging. We have regular monthly meetings so that people feel together. In the beginning, Susie, I mentioned that it's, we make community first and then informs our action. So a lot of what we do first is community building. And then the actions kind of get informed because someone will then go, oh, I would love to go to my representative and bug them about this one, thing. So, so it's about encouraging that community and making it feel possible for people. So.
And in terms of encouraging community, you may have already said this, but next week we'll be starting our community of practice for politically engaged Segal Fellows. So Irma or others, if you haven't signed up yet and you're listening later online, you can always join our internal Segal community to support fellows who are engaged in a variety of political and electoral actions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sophie.
Sophie.
So yeah, that's it for me. I'm going to stop the share and I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you all for joining.